On the night of February 11, 2023, the desert outside Phoenix was cloaked in silence. In that silence, something unthinkable happened. Her name was Mercedes Vega, a young woman with dreams too big for the world she lived in. Known for her radiant smile, her vibrant energy, and her determination to build a better life, Mercedes was only 22 years old when her life was taken in the most brutal way imaginable. This is her story. A story of love turned toxic, of obsession that spiraled into violence, and of a family and community forever changed. Mercedes was like any other young woman chasing her future. She worked hard, surrounded herself with friends, and dreamed of opening her own beauty salon. To her friends, she was the kind of person who lit up a room. To her family, she was the heart that held them together. But behind her laughter, a darker shadow was forming. That shadow had a name: Sincere Hayes. He was quiet, detached, an ex-boyfriend who couldn't let go. For weeks, he had been circling back into her life, demanding attention, searching for control. What Mercedes didn't know was that his obsession had already begun to cross a dangerous line. On that February night, Mercedes left work and walked into the parking lot, unaware that Hayes was waiting. Surveillance footage later revealed his car parked nearby, headlights dim, engine silent, like a predator ready to strike. Moments later, Mercedes vanished. By morning, her friends grew worried. Calls went unanswered, messages left unread. Hours passed before police were notified. And when detectives began to trace her last steps, their search led them far beyond the city, into the dark emptiness of the desert. There, they found her burned car. Inside, the charred remains of a young woman whose life had been brutally cut short. Within hours, investigators zeroed in on Hayes. His phone records placed him at the scene. Surveillance footage showed him circling the parking lot where Mercedes disappeared. And most damning of all, his own words, his confession, tied him to the crime. Hayes admitted to abducting Mercedes, driving her deep into the desert, and shooting her. He described it with chilling calm, as though the act carried no weight at all. To the public, the story was horrifying. To Mercedes' family, it was shattering. She hadn't just been murdered, she had been hunted. The arrest of Hayes sparked outrage across Phoenix. Neighbors gathered outside the courthouse, carrying candles, demanding justice. But even with Hayes behind bars, the question lingered. What could drive someone to such cruelty? By late 2023, the case was ready for trial. The courtroom filled quickly, not just with attorneys and reporters, but with neighbors, friends, and strangers drawn to the story of a young life stolen. At the back of the room sat Mercedes' family, her mother, her siblings, clutching hands, bracing for every detail they were about to hear. And then there was Hayes. Dressed in an orange prison uniform, he sat expressionless. No tears, no anger, no regret. Just a hollow stare, as though the trial was happening around him, not to him. The prosecution laid out a timeline as sharp as a blade. Surveillance footage of Hayes waiting in the parking lot. Forensic evidence from the burned car, tying him to the crime. DNA samples that matched perfectly. And finally, his own confession. Each piece stacked against him, brick by brick, sealing his fate. The defense argued it was a crime of passion, a moment of losing control. But the evidence told another story. Hayes had stalked, abducted, tortured, and killed. Nothing about it was impulsive. It was calculated. For Mercedes' family, the evidence was unbearable. Her mother wept as forensic experts described her injuries. Friends turned away from photos of the burned vehicle. Each word reopened the wound, but they stayed, because being present was the only way to honor her. And through it all, Hayes never flinched. When the jury returned, their decision was swift and unanimous, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole. But even then, Hayes showed nothing. No remorse, no humanity, only silence. For the state of Arizona, the case was closed. But for Mercedes' loved ones, the true sentence was a lifetime without her. At home, Her mother still set an extra plate at the table. Her siblings scrolled through old texts, terrified to delete the last traces of her voice. Friends at the nightclub felt her absence like a missing heartbeat. She had been their spark, the one who made them laugh, who dreamed of opening a salon they could all be proud of. Now, they spoke of creating that salon in her honor, so her dream would not die with her. Across Phoenix, strangers lit candles, wrote her name on walls, and whispered prayers. Her death became more than a story of crime. It became a rallying cry for awareness. And yet, behind every vigil and every hashtag, her family carried the deeper pain. Every birthday, every holiday, every gathering held an empty chair. Why? Why do some people turn love into possession and possession into violence? In Hayes' case, investigators uncovered a trail of obsession. Late-night searches, constant monitoring of Mercedes' life, jealousy disguised as care. Psychologists call it obsessive relational intrusion. It begins with too many texts, demands for reassurance, the need to know where someone is. It seems like devotion until it becomes control. And when control slips away, obsession often erupts into rage. Hayes hadn't snapped. He had planned. He had stalked. He had decided that if Mercedes wouldn't belong to him, she wouldn't belong to anyone. His silence in the courtroom wasn't remorse. It was emptiness. The final proof that he had never seen her as a person, only as something to own. Mercedes' story is a warning. Love should never feel like fear. The verdict locked Hayes away forever. But Mercedes' story didn't end there. Her family spoke at vigils, telling her story so others might be spared. Her friends raised funds to one day open the salon she dreamed of. Advocacy groups turned her tragedy into education, teaching young people about healthy relationships and the danger signs of control. Her name became a symbol in Phoenix, not of violence, but of resilience. And while her family will always feel the weight of her absence, the empty chair, the missing voice, they choose to hope. Hope that by remembering Mercedes, they can protect someone else. Hope that her story can save a life. Hope that silence will never again hide danger. The story of Mercedes Vega is more than a crime. It's a reminder that love should never hurt, that control is not care, that silence can be deadly. Her life was stolen, but her story remains. And sometimes, a story is strong enough to save someone else's.